Did you know that many students in our public schools feel like they don't belong? Did you know that all students need to be recognized by the assets that they bring in order to feel at home in schools and learn with ease? I have news for you, listeners. Some educators do not believe in their students, and they see them as an issue to the school's overall ratings and performance. Is there hope in community schools? Welcome to our listeners in the north, south, east, and west of our nation. We are Educa K16 podcast, bringing distinguished guests with a wealth of knowledge and expertise to cultivate curiosity, provide educational advice and best practices to move the education conversation forward. Stay in the now with Educa K16. Shout outs to Jose Carlos from Bottles for our post production, to DTO Music for our jingle, and to Arte Zone for our branding. We give a heartfelt welcome to my co host, Dr. Abdin Novoa Rios, who has written the most recent books in the nation about Latinos in education in American history and the critical issues that we face in the 21st century. Also today, we have a distinguished guest, Dr. Carlos Azcoitia, who brings a wealth of knowledge from his service in different educational roles in Chicago. Dr. Novoa, please do the honors to introduce Dr. Azcoitia.
It's a pleasure to be back. It's a pleasure to have Dr. Carlos Azcoitia with us today. And it's very difficult for me to give an introduction because he's a jack of all trades when it comes to education. So I will give it a very brief try. He was once principal of a school. He was a director of another school. He was associate superintendent. He also later sat on the board of a major school district in the country, the Chicago Public Schools. And subsequent to that, he also was a university professor. He now sits on the board as a trustee of another university in the Chicago area. He also has written several books, numerous articles, and is now a mentor to a lot of key educators nationwide. And that's just the beginning of a list of areas that he has well performed in his many years as an educator. So without further ado, I'd like to bring him into the conversation that we are having every week with an outstanding Latino educator and leader. And so, in a nutshell, Sandra, that's the ABCs of Carlos Azcoitia.
If you just tuned in, we are Educa K16, and our focus today is on community schools. I quote a formal high school principal, Diana Hernandez Azcoitia. Do you know her, Dr. Azcoitia? Well,
Absolutely.
she is quoted in Dr. Novoa's book. While he was doing his research for his two books, she is quoted by saying, our schools are still not culturally relevant. We have a culture of incompetence when it comes to culture itself. If this is the case, then no wonder in some schools students don't feel at home. Audience, listen and learn from Dr. Ascoitia and what he has to share with us today about community schools.
And speaking of community schools, I know a lot of our listeners are not exactly sure what we mean by a community school. It seems like we have something called charter schools, we have magnet schools, we have bilingual schools, we have neighborhood schools, and the question is, why do we talk about community schools? Isn't a community school like every other school in a neighborhood? And so, to clarify what is meant by the term community schools, we want to hear from one of the major advocates and also experts in the area of community schools to help us understand what on earth is a community school. Carlos.
Well, thank you for inviting me to this meaningful conversation and for that introduction. Education has been a lifelong effort. And I was a principal of a community school for 10 years. But let me define it because I think you have to speak of different models and how you can develop community in any type of school. So, community schools are schools that target educational improvement through partnerships with families, community organizations. Schools cannot do everything, but if it affects learning, it becomes a responsibility of the school. And that's how you develop these partnerships that can connect to the school improvement plan of the school. We know that the greatest influence of the student and the student is the family. And the greatest influence on the family is the community. So if you take a look at what schools can do to integrate families into the education of their children and the role that they can play, as well as community partnerships, then the opportunities for success become greater. Now, this has to be well planned, this has to be um, well connected and aligned. Because some schools might say, well, I'm a community school because I'm open and I offer after school programs. Well, that's not entirely what defines a community school. So, principals of community schools have to cross boundaries because education is affected by what happens inside the school and outside the school. So you have to be boundary spanners. And it's the quality of the classroom plus what happens outside. So community schools, in essence, is characterized by the inclusion in very meaningful ways of families and community partners.
Well, let me piggyback on that. Thank you. That's very helpful. Why aren't all neighborhood schools then community schools? It would seem to me that given that role of a school, most of our schools should be doing exactly what you just said. And a lot of us think that the
Right.
schools are doing exactly what you said. What's missing there? What do we not yet know?
Well, community schools is about sharing power with community. It's about taking a look also at dissenting energy and making them part of this whole process. Um, Community schools take a look at instructional leadership and see the connections between the inclusion of families and community partners. And sometimes people call themselves community schools, but sometimes they can become Christmas tree schools that have a lot of things going on, but not necessarily focused and aligned on student achievement. The role of the principal changes as you cross boundaries to be able to have a broader influence in the quality of life of a community. So it's a process of evolution, it's a process of ongoing quality, and some schools can achieve that, and others are on their way. But neighborhood schools should be quality community schools following this whole process that I have described.
So, just going a little bit deeper with community schools, Dr. Ascoitia, like, how do we know that community schools are effective? Like, what is the evidence?
Well, the evidence has to do with not only achievement growth for all of the students, but you're taking a look at a reduction in mobility, at increased attendance, a reduction in dropout rates, a an an engagement of families that goes beyond window dressing. It's the meaningful engagement. When you offer services in schools and you identify community partners, you consult. with your community. And when you connect to the quality of life of a community, then you develop relational trust with its residents. Those are the elements. And it might be a different kind of work and it's extensive work, but it's all worth it when you begin to see results. And it can lead to a concept that's very important, which is how do you develop relational accountability? You know, the accountability that counts is internal accountability. When the school, the families, and your community partners accept responsibility for student growth and academic achievement. And that's the major evidence of a community school.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
One of the things that impressed me about one of your books that you co-authored with Perlington was that a community school is not just a building, but it's a building that's useful for the community. So it's not just a building for students and teachers, but one that's basically in the community for the community, so that in the evenings, on weekends, the school is utilized with the community so that it's not just another basketball game or another football game or another sporting event, but it's also one where the community can be convened, where the community has access to basically 24/7. And that brings the school and the community together in a whole different way than just academics. Uh, can you say a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. A community school is the hub of the community, is a center for progress for the students, teachers, families, in partnership with community organizations. You know, it's not easy to keep a school open that long. We were open until 7 every day, and we opened on Saturdays. If I would have opened the school on Sundays, the families would be there and the students because they love their school. So we offered classes with community college that came into the building to the parents of our community where they learned English, they learned GED, they learned technology. Um, so on Saturday mornings, we had, since we were a year round school with a year round program, we offered a lot of extracurricular activities for leadership development. We offered sports. So, all of those aspects are very important. But something I want to share is that many times a community school has to go outside of its building and in order to reach everyone. And I can cite a project that we did a few times where we began to have living room conversations with families, with parent leaders who invited their neighbors in their block. And I brought a teacher with me, and we discussed, we had decided with our community council to focus on three major topics: literacy, health, and safety. And these living room conversations talked about what's the role of the school, what's the role of the family, what's the role of the community. So I want to emphasize that when we speak about cross boundary leadership, we're talking about not only everything that happens in the school, but taking the school out of its walls so education is able to have a broader environment and reach families because education is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You know, there's a famous quote that was anonymous, and it said, "The accident of birth should not be the determining factor about student success. Education can make that difference." even though birth is a blessing, but children do not control under what environment they are born. And yet, education can have this transformative power.
That's beautiful. I love that. Uh, Moving beyond the community
Powerful.
school, and I know that you are a major mentor of superintendents, associate superintendents, principals all over the country, and also in the process of training and mentoring extensively sometimes in terms of troubleshooting certain situations throughout. Uh, what is it? How do you see what's going on in education today about what might be missing in the educational process? Because we're still not doing well. And according to the NAEP scores and other measures of achievement, the Latino population is still not doing anywhere as well as it should. What, what is yet to be done? What is yet missing? As you see it, because you see it nationally, and you even see it globally sometimes, because your work goes beyond just the United States. How do you see the country in terms of what's happening or not happening in the education arena?
Well, let me say that we have had pockets of progress in some areas. We still take a look at a lot of disparities with the Latino population compared to other groups. And I think, for example, in Chicago, we have increased graduation rates, lowered dropout rates, increased the percentage of freshmen on track, but it is not enough. There are still a lot of disparities over. So I think we need to start thinking of new models. We have the challenge of post secondary graduation and retention. So, if our students are doing better in our schools, what's going to happen next? And how do we prepare them for post secondary graduation? You know, I serve as a trustee on a public university, besides being on the faculty of a small not for profit private university. And retention has been a big issue. And I think it's a matter many times of affordability, of work experience, of preparation for post secondary education. So, as I connect this to the topic that we're discussing, how do we engage early on from preschool all of our families and our communities to know that graduation begins when you start in preschool? You know, I remember, since we had a pre-K through high school program, that when I had orientation for the preschool parents, my first sentence in welcoming them was, graduation from post-secondary begins now. Now you have to start preparing your children, becoming engaged, extending their learning. And we have to pay attention of all populations. You know, the ones who need more assistance, the ones who are on grade level, the ones who are gifted. How do we provide equity for all of them? And how do we meet those challenges? We also have a challenge that we have decreased the number of Latino teachers nationwide. We've had demographic changes and they are not entering the profession. You take a look at a place like Chicago, where it's right now about 48%. It's the largest percentage of students with this identity. And yet, our numbers are decreasing in terms of the preparation of teachers. So, those are the challenges that we have to meet. We also have to be innovative and creative about developing new models. If you take a look at the way we have delivered education, it really hasn't changed. You have the same process. You know, when I was planning this pre K through high school and getting feedback from the community that I was ready to serve, a lot of people said this is not going to work because, we always operate primary, middle school, high school with all of these transitions. And yet, the years that I was there, we began to see this achievement growth. And when you ask the students, why are you here in a year round program with a longer school day, having to start early because you work in the school as tutors of primary children? You know what they said? Because I want to graduate. My parents sent me to this school because I have aspirations for a career, and this school is going to prepare me to do that. So I think it's a variety of factors that affects our community. And let me tell you that in Chicago, a great number, a majority of students attend neighborhood schools because we serve a hardworking community. They want to be in close proximity. So when we said all brothers and sisters can be in the same school when parents had to work the midnight shift or the early shift, you had the older brothers and sisters who can walk them to school. It was a different model. Teachers were able to start later, as well as students. And the teenage clock has always indicated you can start a little bit later, and it doesn't matter if they end later. So we experimented with all of these things. But in serving our communities, we have to be innovative and creative to get different results.
Yeah, I mean, I could just sit here and listen to you all day long. I want to, for the sake of our stakeholders listening, our audience, we have parents listening, we have teachers, educators, and policy makers. So if you have to give them each a message, what is your message?
Well, let me quote Gabriela Mistral. Gabriela Mistral, as you know, was a Nobel Prize winner in literature. And there's a segment that she shared with us that says, many things can wait, but the children cannot, because their blood and bones are being formed. To them, we cannot say tomorrow. Their name is today. So we have to become engaged immediately at what happens in the school. The moment you have children coming into your family, how do we prepare them for a healthy welcoming so they are ready to enter school when they are ready? With principals and teachers, when you're serving a population, what do we know about the community that we're serving? What do we know about their assets, their gifts? What do we know about their challenges? I remember when we were recruiting teachers in our building, we wanted to assess all of their credentials for quality. But there's the element, why do you want to work in this school? What do you know about our community? What do you know about the cultural identity of whom you're serving? How do you take those assets and develop them further? So the issue becomes that our commitment begins entirely right from the beginning. And we are all on a search for quality improvement. And we all have to take a look at evidence and data among multiple variables that demonstrate quality. And we all have to be engaged. We always hear we have to have high expectations. And sometimes I remember when I had a teacher whose students were not doing well consistently. And sometimes I would get the reaction, well, I have the highest expectations. Then I said, as a principal, is this why they are failing? If you have high expectations, why aren't they producing for you? I can understand during the first marking period, but as students progress, if they are not learning and they are caught in a syndrome of failure, when does that high expectation transfer to practice? So, this is really the essence of a community school. How do we come together to develop internal and relational accountability to make this a reality for all students and our Latino population?
Dr. Novoa, bring it home to us. I know I put you on this spot every week, but you are the perfect person to do this. Bring it home to us. Everything that um, Dr. Azcoitia has mentioned, the quality education, community schools being a hub, not just being a building, I think he said a Christmas tree lighting or a lit Christmas tree in the community, but really being that hub to service the community in reference to our achievement for Latino students. Like, bring that home that in for us.
A lot has been said. It, I wish I had a total transcript of every sentence that Dr. Ascoitia shared with us. I think it was beautiful. I think it's essential. I wish every educator could listen to that and learn from it accordingly. I wish I had had him as a mentor of mine years ago, but so we learn. What I have seen, experienced, and learned today is that education is everything. Education goes beyond a school building. Education is community, and schooling is community. And until the two become one and the same, and one the extension of the other, these are like inevitable twins. They have to go together, or the puzzle doesn't fit. The pieces don't make the full puzzle. And we're missing something when we begin to basically disintegrate. And so to me, it's a matter of finding that commonality once again and that humanness that connects education to everything it is that we feel and believe is about our community. Because after all, that is our future, that is our people. And you have to do it collectively and collaboratively. So to me, it was a great learning. I fully thank Dr. Ascoitia for his good message, his wise words, and his mentorship. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Escoitia. Thank you, Dr. Novoa. You heard it here, listeners. We need to think of new models in education. We are Educa K16. Our conversation today was with distinguished expert on community schools, Dr. Carlos Ascoitia, speaking about schools becoming the hub of the community. That's progress. I mean, shouldn't that be the case with every neighborhood school? And you heard our co host, Dr. Novoa, who has written two books: The Story of Latinos and Education in American History and Critical Issues of Latinos and Education in the 21st Century America. Where are we? You can find these on Amazon, of course. There's nothing like reading the book yourself. Remember, audience, Educa K16 is a call to action to raise awareness about education in our nation as we bring to life the books Dr. Novoa has written through our interviews. Please go and listen to the podcast that you've missed on Spotify or Anchor, or visit our Educa K16 YouTube channel to put faces to a name. Stay tuned next week as we continue the conversation on education.